Welcome, everybody. In this video, Brian and myself will be beginning our series on reading through and discussing the analysis and assessment of the Gateway Experience. I'll be leaving a link in the description if anyone's interested in reading it themselves. Otherwise, Brian and I will be reading it for you and providing some pictures on screen as we touch on different topics. I hope you enjoy.
Okay, this is a reading of the analysis and assessment of the Gateway process. This was conducted June 9th, 1983 to Commander U.S. Army Operational Group Fort Meade, more specifically Albert Stubblebine. Let's see. 1. You tasked me to provide an assessment of the Gateway experience in terms of its mechanics and ultimate practicality. As I set out to fulfill that tasking, it soon became clear that in order to assess the validity and practicality of the process, I needed to do enough supporting research and analysis to fully understand how and why the process works. Frankly, sir, that proved to be an extremely involved and difficult business. Initially, based on conversations with the physician who took the Gateway training with me, I had recourse to the biomedical models developed by Itzhak Bentov to obtain information concerning the physical aspects of the process. Then I found it necessary to delve into various sources of information concerning quantum mechanics in order to be able to describe the nature and functioning of human consciousness. I had to be able to construct a scientifically valid and reasonably lucid model of how consciousness functions under the influence of the brain hemisphere synchronization technique employed by Gateway. Once this was done, the next step involved recourse to theoretical physics in order to explain the character of the time-space dimension and the means by which expanded human consciousness transcends it in achieving Gateway's objectives. Finally, I again found it necessary to use physics to bring the whole phenomenon of out-of-body states into the language of physical science to remove the stigma of its occult connotations and put it in a frame of reference suited for objective assessment. 2. I began the narrative by briefly profiling the fundamental biomedical factors affecting such related techniques as hypnosis, biofeedback, and transcendental meditation, so that their objectives and mode of functioning could be compared in the reader's mind with the Gateway experience as the model of its underlying mechanics was developed. Additionally, that introductory material is useful in supporting the conclusions of the paper. I indicate that at times these related techniques may provide useful entry points to accelerate movement into the Gateway experience. 3. Niels Bohr, the renowned physicist, once responded to his son's complaints about the obtuse nature of certain concepts in physics by saying, "You're not thinking, you are merely being logical." The physics of altered human consciousness deals with some conceptualizations that are not easily grasped or visualized exclusively in the context of ordinary left brain linear thinking. So, to borrow from Bohr's mode of expression, parts of this paper may require not only logic but a touch of right brain intuitive insight to achieve a complete, comfortable grasp of the concepts involved. Nevertheless, once this is done, I am confident that their construction and application will stand up to the test of rational critique. 4. Paradoxically, having gone such great lengths to avoid trying to render judgment based on an occult or dogmatic frame of reference, in the end I found it necessary to return, at least briefly, to the question of the impact of the Gateway experience on common belief systems. I did so because, although it was essential to avoid attempting to render an assessment in the context of such systems, I felt that it was necessary, after having completed the analysis, to point out that the resulting conclusions do not do any violence to the fundamental mainstream of either Eastern or Western belief systems. Unless that point is clearly established, the danger exists that some people will reject the whole concept of the Gateway experience in the mistaken belief that it contradicts and is therefore alien to all that they hold to be right and true. 5. This study is certainly not designed to be the last word on the subject, but I hope that the validity of its basic structure and of the fundamental concepts upon which it is based will make it a useful guide for those United States Army Intelligence and Security Command personnel who are required to take the Gateway training or work with Gateway materials. Wayne M. McDonnell. What is that, Lieutenant Colonel?
Yeah, Military Intelligence.
Military Intelligence Command. Okay. So we have Wayne McDonnell is conducting this analysis and assessment of the Gateway experience for the Army, more specifically Commander Albert Stubblebine.
Yeah, so that is the generic commander that he addresses in the beginning. Stubblebine was in charge of, what's the abbreviation? INSCOM, the U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command from 81 to 84, and this took place right smack dab in the middle of that 83. Stubblebine was an interesting guy, to say the least. You had mentioned earlier that that Men Who Stare at Goats, that's a movie that's based off of the author's experience having met Stubblebine.
They definitely made that movie around the commander in the very beginning of the movie that walks through the wall is definitely
the
Stubblebine
character. Yeah.
who is, it's been noted that he has been caught doing the same, attempting the same thing, and they do kind of wrap it into this whole comedy thing, referring like Star Wars, referencing Star Wars things like Jedi, but that's definitely just a costume. They kind of put this whole Gateway process information into for a movie. This is
it's just one part of it. But
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, maybe what we should do is take a little bit of time talking about Wayne McDonnell, because that's we're essentially going to be reading a paper that is like the digestions and the ruminations of his mind. And so this is his perspective on what he's observing. It's interesting to think about the motivations of the commander and why he wants them to do this, but I think it's important also to talk a little bit about this McDonnell guy and kind of identify, kind of who he was via his military career. I've done some research trying to find some more information about him, and there's really, really scarce information online. He's got a few commendations from his time in Vietnam. He was in Vietnam from 67 to 68 with military intelligence. He got an Army accommodation for that. He also received another accommodation for, what's the time frame on this? Nope, I'm sorry. He only got one single accommodation. I'm thinking Stubblebine. Stubblebine actually had quite a few accommodations, but he got the single accommodation for his time in Vietnam, 67 to 68. Interestingly enough, Stubblebine also received an accommodation, a Legion of Merit, for his time with G2 Intelligence from 1967 to 1968. So I think you see an interesting opportunity for a crossover there. You would have had like a Lieutenant Colonel or a Colonel Stubblebine in Vietnam who would have been, dealing with a subordinate by the name of, Captain McDonnell. And I think what we see is a military analyst being called on by somebody who's been put in charge of U.S. INSCOM, and asking him to provide an analytical breakdown of what appears to be like a metaphysical outcome. And so he's trying to make sense of this. I would like to point out, this is not Wayne McDonnell's only work. The other item that I could found that he wrote is also another book, and it's an analytical book. It's interesting because it has nothing to do with any of this metaphysical stuff, and nothing to do with spiritualism or mysticism or any of that kind of stuff. It's actually an analysis of the NVA in Laos from 1951 to 1973, which is when he was in Vietnam. So I mean, this guy is a military analyst. He's not like a space age guru or any of that kind of stuff. He like is a brass tacks, give me the facts kind of guy. And so the paper that we're going to read is essentially like a brass tacks take on what is something that's very, very difficult to explain and even harder to comprehend. So I like that it's like we're getting this dry military approach to breaking down what in a lot of ways seems like to be the fundamental way our universe operates. So I think that's important to touch on. No matter who Stubblebine was or how wacky he was, the guy he picked to write this paper, based on at least the one other previous work I can find and his commendations, seemed to be a straight-laced military officer who was an analyst at heart.
With no history, experiencing stuff prior to this assessment.
And it's funny because when you read this, you can tell that his almost immediate realization was that this is going to be perceived as in conflict with other religions, and you can tell that because he goes out of his way to explain that it's not. You
Yeah.
know, it's like when you feel the need to express something, it's normally because you recognize a problem.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, he'll say, let's see, he's talking about how even just at the very beginning of the paper, how even just to be able to explain and structure what he's trying to say, he needs to like go back and do some research just from the
Yeah.
very get-go.
Yeah, that's what he says. As I set out to fulfill that tasking, it soon became clear that in order to assess the validity and practicality of the process, I needed to do enough supporting research and analysis to fully understand how and why the process works. Frankly, sir, that proved to be an extremely involved and difficult business.
Yeah.
What a great summary.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's good stuff. I mean, you can just see like this normal man who's just been frustrated by what he's been given, but like that's just the nature of the military. You just you adapt and you overcome.
But I like it because I like that he has this type of mindset, and he's not someone that's like already completely accepted it, and he's kind of in a way kind of like push it or preach it.
Yeah, yeah.
In a sense, this is like he's also getting convinced with his own just analysis of it himself.
I feel like this was a very good choice for a neutral. You know, if you wanted somebody to step in and be neutral and provide you an unbiased account based
I
just
agree.
on observation, he seems to have done a pretty good job.
Yeah.
You know, and I can't see anything in the writing that leads me to believe that, you know, there's like any personal bias or motivation behind what he's doing. It was just kind of like he was asked and so he answered. That seems to be the tenor of the document.
Yeah, something I absolutely love about this opening letter is how he kind of talks about how you know, this doesn't have to interfere with anyone's religious
Yeah,
beliefs.
that's
We're
a
talking
big
about
one.
exclusively like the functionality of the human brain.
And the truth of it is, if you would be a little bit less myopic with your religious beliefs or your spirituality, you might find that within this framework, there's a whole lot more room, peace, and understanding than you ever knew was possible. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was kind of interesting. I mean, that kind of wraps up Wayne McDonald for me. He seems like a real interesting guy. You know, he's got a real military career. He's got accommodations. He's got military service. He's writing papers about Laos, and we didn't fight in Laos. I don't know if you're aware of that. So that's some, you know, combat experience, or at least some military intelligence experience that, like, he was, you know, out on the, you know, front edge. You know, that was like, you know, kind of the area that you weren't supposed to be. You know, so that's, you know, obviously kind of rough duty. One thing I do want to talk about is Stubblebine real quickly. It's just wild. You know, essentially this guy found himself in a position where he just, you know, I'm not saying he drank the Kool-Aid, but he, there's this book called The First Earth Battalion Field Manual. It was written in '79, and for him it was like an inspirational document. And his goal was to try to create like a psychic super soldier, you know, that could like hit the battlefield and fight in ways that like you wouldn't even be able to perceive.
Destroy a battalion with your mind,
Yeah, with
and
your
get all the
mind.
information from the enemy at the same time.
It's pretty awesome. He was big into the spoon bending thing.
I guess he came off as kind of a creepy dude. He tried to propose spoon bending at a ceremony. I believe.
Yeah, actually, this is what leads to his early retirement. He goes up to his commanding officer, an Army Chief of Staff General Wickham, and he offers to perform a spoon bending for this guy. And Wickham's like a hardcore Protestant, and he takes this as like an acknowledgement that he's got a Satanist in charge of Army intel, and so he ends up going into early retirement. I bring this up because it's really funny. I found this paper from 1989. And it's INSCOM's Past and Future, a commanding general's perspective. And this is basically 5 years after the Stubblebine experience. And this is the new Major General Soyster, the guy who's in charge of...
That replaces him?
That replaces him. This is the paper that's written 5 years later while he's in charge. And they actually do address some of the earlier Stubblebine stuff. This is just in the... I think it's the third page of the document. There's a section that starts, in Major General Soyster's estimation, his greatest contribution had been to redirect the command's focus into operational channels. The previous INSCOM commander, Major General Albert Stubblebine III, had introduced a number of innovative programs in the area of organizational effectiveness. Although Major General Soyster thought that much of what had been done was positive, there was a widespread outside perception that the command had gotten somewhat off course. I just thought that's great because if you know like about the military, they don't shit talk. You know what I mean? You don't ever, you know what? You just let it go. You don't put it on paper. You let it go. You know. And so they're like going out of their way to like really kind of like strike a note about how effed up everything was.
Yeah, they can't leave a paper trail that there's instability inside of their
Yeah,
command.
exactly. Yeah. So I think that's kind of interesting because this is like the kind of wording that you don't find in like military documents. This is the kind of stuff that gets edited out. But this one made it through. So, I mean, I think there's a real sense that within this 5-year period, they were like, the program probably really got a lot further than we're aware, I guess would be my takeaway.
You think?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've talked to you about this before, how interesting it is that in 1983, U.S. Army Intel is doing this research, and then in 2003, the CIA produces the document. And, I mean, I would just go to this point. After 9/11, we learned that our intelligence agencies, not only do they not cooperate with each other, since the birth of the institutions, they've been like antagonistic towards each other. Not only do they not cooperate, they like withhold information that specifically is being requested by other agencies. So the whole idea that the military intelligence would do all this research and then just like toss it into CIA's lap, that's not how it works. Military intelligence is going to want to hang on to this. Somebody took it out of their lap and somebody gave it to CIA, because what that does is it takes it off of every known budget and turns it into like some $80 billion black budget, you know, that we have going every year. I mean, I make this point over and over about our hypersonic missile programs. Like every 2 years we shutter our hypersonic missile programs and we start a brand new one. It's not because they don't work. It's because you don't want to let somebody cohesively see you develop an entire weapon system. You need to make portions of the project. You need to do so in a way that when you roll, like per se, that F-117, you know, bomber out and it's completely combat ready and nobody had any idea that it was coming down the line, that's what you want. You know what I mean? You want like day one superiority, like mind-blowing superiority. You know, and so this is like the whole nature of the clandestine, you know, intelligence agencies. When they find something that works, I mean, all communication shuts down. We can't talk about this anymore.
Yeah, so even being in the agency, these projects that are happening are broken up even into smaller pieces. So even if you're involved in even just a small sense, you don't have the grand picture of what's actually going on stuff that you don't have your fingers in.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah, well, I mean, then you're looking at like the special access programs where like information's so compartmentalized that even if you have the authority to view the program, if you don't have the permission to view the program, you're not going to view the program.
It's literally just like the directors that have all the knowledge.
Yeah. So. Yeah, it's pretty wild stuff. I mean, when I see this, I see this as something that potentially our government has worked with in the past, and very likely probably still does to some degree or another today. You know, maybe even more amplified than we can understand.
Do you think that like countries like China have such a thing? You've said before that like the Chinese government has spoke about the dangers of meditation. Do you think that they've taken such context as this amongst themselves to try to achieve other something on the same?
I don't know. I don't know if it's just like an anti-religious position, you know, because you know the nature of communism is that like religion is kind of a necessary outgrowth.
Yeah.
You know, so I think they just kind of like an anti-religion bend to the form of government that governs the people. But I think it's kind of interesting that they are targeting like groups like the was it Falun Gong or that I believe that was the group that was targeted specifically in 2002 when the country banned meditation. You know, and so essentially they made it so people weren't allowed to get together and they weren't allowed to meditate in groups. And I don't know if it was about, you know, potentially trying to limit their ability to redirect or channel power or just about suppressing religion.
I think it would be the former. I feel like with the focusing of energy, I think even if people are doing it in the form of religion, even if it might not be the most efficient way of channeling energy, I do think that I still think that energy is doing something, and I think it does pose a potential threat to something like the Chinese government, and so I can't help but just.
Well, I think probably the best way, because I mean, I come from like a political science background, you know what I mean? So like, you know, nationalism, all these different concepts that bring countries together and cause them to either war with each other or to cooperate, or for an individual country to do certain things to its people to maintain power. I think it's more fair just to look at them in governments in general, you know what I mean? The truth of it is every government, no matter how democratic it says it is in the business of staying in charge. They're not giving up any of their power, you know? So by definition, government is like authoritarian. So if we just accept that all governments are authoritarian, it's just a question of how authoritarian are they. And so at that point, you're like, well, how much poop do you want in your water? I'd like none, please. You know, it's like even the smallest bit creates a problem.
Sure, but to ban meditation and like meditation stemming from the East, I mean, that just, gosh, my brain just runs wild as far as what could be the reasoning.
I mean, I guess really, if you think about it, I mean, the personal awareness that I've had and the awakenings that I've had recently have been like life changing, you know. And so, like the sense that I have, I mean, we were listening to that. I think it was Timothy Leary. He was doing that quote. He was talking about how people that are doing psychedelics, they're not going to fight your wars. They're not going to work for your corporations. You know what I mean? They're just not going to do it. You know. And so, if you're not on a psychedelic, but you are in a place where you're able to alter your consciousness through meditation, I can see how that creates like a real strong resistance to like conforming to government. You know, to the structure that government intends for its society or citizens to apply to their life. You know, and the more totalitarian the governments, you know, the more authoritarian the government is, you know, the more you see that outpouring via banning meditation, putting, you know, people in camps just because of their nationality. But see, this is why it's not fair to say China, because this is like every government, you know. Governments do this all the time throughout history. You know, we segregate people, we treat them differently. You know, sometimes in the worst cases, we kill them.
Sure.
You know, I mean, nobody ever talks about this, but like Neanderthals seemed like they were doing all right. And then all of a sudden, Neanderthals just like disappeared. And we find grave sites where there's just a shit ton of dead Neanderthals. And so the question is like, hey, humans,
Sure.
what happened to your neighbor?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like the concept of genocide is like at our very foundations, you know, that we understand that it's like a battle of resources. And at a certain point in time, it's what community will thrive and survive, you know?
That's a good, interesting point.
So yeah, I'm going to be the first one to say it. I'm going to call us out for the Neanderthal genocide. I think something needs to be done.
Okay. But let's see. So the cover letter is pretty basic, straightforward. And as we continue through our reading and just assessment of this paper, we're going to...
The next sections we're going to go through are going to discuss kind of an introduction, and then they're going to talk about some of the methods. We'll talk about hypnosis, transcendental meditation, biofeedback, some of the places they use to get to a place that they refer to as hemisync, which is, you know, when your brain hemispheres get to a place where they're like moving together or there's more harmony, and so your brain's functioning in a more effective place. And then they go into some of the amazing things you can do once you get to that point.
And not only that, they the paper also has sections in the later chapters about how what type of universe this all makes sense in.
Yeah.
And so we're going to be diving into these through this series in the weeks to come. And yeah, we'll be making some YouTube videos, leaving links so that people could have access to the paper themselves.
And I've got links. So I've got PDFs of all the accommodations. I've also got that report from 1989 where they're going out of their way to, you know, throw a little bit of smack on Stubblebine. So it's just interesting to see it like in writing in a government document. None of this stuff is like fictional. This all happened. This is like...
Yeah, send me what you can of those papers so that when I do post these videos, I can just leave links to the papers so that people can just pull them up themselves. And that's going to be it. Look forward to having people check us out on our later videos as we go through this. Thanks.
Thank you for listening, everybody. If you enjoyed this video, stay tuned as we continue through the entire paper. And if anyone has any recommendations on a future series for me and Brian to delve into, please feel free to mention it to us in the comments. Thanks.